The sighting didn't come with an announcement. There were no flashing cameras, no coordinated posts, no carefully timed statements. It began the way most meaningful moments do now, quietly, almost accidentally, through a simple observation that carried more weight than anyone expected. Freen and Becky were seen leaving the studio together, side by side. For weeks, fans had grown used to absence, separate schedules, separate appearances, separate updates that never crossed paths. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. And in a fandom built on attention to detail, silence speaks loudly. That's why this moment mattered. Not because it promised anything, not because it confirmed rumors, but because after a period of distance, they chose to walk out of the same place, at the same time, together. The studio itself wasn't insignificant. It wasn't a casual stop or a public event designed for visibility. It was a place associated with long hours, pressure, repetition, and quiet exhaustion. The kind of place where masks tend to fall away rather than go on. Leaving together from a space like that doesn't feel performative. It feels natural or intentional. Witnesses describe the moment as calm. There was no rush, no tension in their movements. They didn't appear startled to be seen, nor did they try to hide. Their pace matched. Their distance felt familiar. Not overly close, not guarded, just comfortable. And comfort after time apart is never accidental. Fans reacted quickly, but not loudly. This wasn't the kind of sighting that sparked chaos. It sparked relief. Messages began appearing across platforms, not filled with demands, but with gratitude. People weren't asking for explanations. They weren't insisting on labels. Many simply said they felt lighter seeing them together again. Because what had weighed on fans wasn't curiosity, it was uncertainty. For a long time, Freen and Becky had represented something steady. Their dynamic wasn't built on spectacle or constant reassurance. It lived in small gestures, quiet understanding, and a shared rhythm that didn't need explanation. When that rhythm paused, fans felt it. The separation, whatever its reasons, created space for countless narratives. Some believed it was necessary growth. Others worried it meant something had broken. Most didn't know what to think, only that something felt missing. That's why this sighting reframed everything. Not by answering questions, but by changing the emotional tone. Industry insiders later described the energy between them that day as settled. Not excited, not tense, settled, as if something heavy had been put down, as if there was no need to prove or fix anything in that moment. That word lingered with fans. Settled. It suggested acceptance rather than resolution, presence rather than performance. People began revisiting older moments, not to speculate, but to remember. The way Freen and Becky used to naturally fall into step with each other. The way conversations between them didn't need fillers. The way silence never felt awkward. Seeing them leave the studio together didn't feel like a return to the past. It felt like continuity. As days passed, neither Freen nor Becky addressed the sighting. No posts, no clarifications, no playful comments to redirect attention. And strangely, that lack of response made the moment feel even more genuine. Because if this had been about optics, it would have been framed. If it had been about reassurance, it would have been explained. If it had been about noise, it would have been amplified. Instead, it was left alone. Fans noticed something else too. In the days following the sighting, the online atmosphere softened. Discussions became calmer. The urgency faded. People seemed content to let the moment exist without dissecting it to exhaustion. That shift said everything. Sometimes, seeing two people simply exist together again is enough to quiet fear. It reminded fans that relationships, professional, personal, or somewhere in between, aren't linear. They don't progress neatly. They pause. They stretch. They change shape. And sometimes, they find their way back into the same space without needing an explanation. The studio exit didn't promise a future. It didn't erase the past. It didn't demand interpretation. It just happened. And in happening, it restored something subtle but important. Trust. Trust that whatever Freen and Becky share, they handle it on their own terms. Trust that distance doesn't always mean damage. Trust that silence isn't always loss. For a fandom that had learned to read between lines, this moment offered a line that didn't need reading. Two people, one door, one quiet exit, side by side, and perhaps that's why it resonated so deeply. Because it reminded everyone watching that not all reconnections are dramatic. Not all progress is loud. Sometimes, the most meaningful step forward looks exactly like this. Walking out together after a long day, after time apart, without needing to say a word. For now, that's enough. What made the moment linger wasn't just that they were seen together, but how naturally the world seemed to accept it afterward. There was no backlash, no pushback, no frantic attempts to rewrite narratives. The story didn't explode and burn out. It settled into the background of daily conversations, resurfacing gently whenever fans needed reassurance that not everything fragile is broken forever. And that's when people began to reflect more deeply on the time apart. Distance, after all, doesn't always come from conflict. Sometimes it comes from pressure, from growth, from needing space to breathe without expectations pressing in from every direction. For Freen and Becky, the attention surrounding their dynamic had grown heavy over time. Every interaction was magnified. Every pause was questioned. Every silence became a headline. In that kind of environment, stepping back can be an act of care rather than retreat. Those close to the production environment later hinted that both had been navigating intense personal and professional demands during the period of separation. Long schedules, creative pressure, emotional fatigue that doesn't always show on camera. When two people share that weight, sometimes the healthiest choice is to step away separately before returning with clarity. That context made the studio sighting feel less like a reunion and more like a recalibration. Fans noticed how different it felt from dramatic comeback moments they'd seen elsewhere. There was no attempt to reclaim attention, no visible effort to reassure or excite. Freen and Becky didn't lean into the narrative. They didn't resist it either. They simply allowed it to exist. And that subtle confidence spoke volumes. As time went on, more people who had worked around them began to speak carefully, choosing words that emphasized stability rather than excitement. They described interactions that felt calm, respectful, and unforced. Nothing flashy, nothing fragile. Just two people who understood each other's presence without needing to fill space. That understanding is often mistaken for certainty. But in reality, it's flexibility. The ability to be present without demanding outcomes. To walk alongside someone without needing to define the destination. To leave a studio together not as a statement, but as a choice made in the moment. Fans began using a different language when talking about Freen and Becky. Less urgency, more patience. Instead of asking, "What does this mean?" people started saying, "I'm glad they're okay." That shift was telling, because when concern turns into calm, it means trust has been restored. The studio exit became a reference point, not as proof, but as grounding. Whenever speculation flared up again, fans would return to that image. Two figures stepping out into the evening. No rush, no distance, no performance, just familiarity. And familiarity, especially after time apart, is never meaningless. It suggests conversations that happen privately, understanding reached without witnesses, boundaries adjusted, expectations softened. None of this needs confirmation to be felt. Sometimes, the most important work happens off camera. Freen and Becky's choice to let that moment remain unspoken may be the clearest indication of its authenticity. By not framing it, they protected it. By not explaining it, they allowed it to remain human. And humanity is what fans have always connected to most. As days turned into weeks, the sighting became part of a larger narrative, not one of reunion or separation, but of resilience, of relationships that can bend without breaking, of people who can step away and return without losing themselves or each other. In a culture that demands constant visibility, choosing quiet continuity is a powerful act. Whether Freen and Becky walk this path closely or separately in the future is something only they can decide. But for that one moment, captured without intention or performance, they reminded everyone watching of something essential. That connection doesn't always announce itself. That presence doesn't require explanation. That sometimes, walking side by side again is not a promise, but a peace. And for now, peace is more than enough. The story didn't end there, even though nothing more was seen. Because after that quiet moment, something else began to change, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. The conversation surrounding Freen and Becky softened. The tone shifted from urgency to observation, from demands to patience. People stopped dissecting every frame and started remembering why they cared in the first place. It wasn't about confirmation anymore. It was about recognition. Fans who had followed their journey from the beginning began sharing memories instead of theories. Old interviews resurfaced, not to analyze hidden meanings, but to appreciate how naturally they once spoke about trust, respect, and timing. Clips circulated where laughter came easily, where silences felt comfortable rather than tense. These weren't used as evidence. They were shared as reminders. Reminders that what people saw that night leaving the studio wasn't new. It was familiar. And familiarity, after distance, has a different weight. It carries history. It carries choice. It carries the quiet understanding that comes only from time spent apart and then realigned. Some fans noticed that in the days following the sighting, both Freen and Becky appeared lighter in their public schedules. Not louder, not more expressive, just steadier. Their energy seemed grounded, as if something internal had settled. There was no attempt to capitalize on attention. No subtle nudges to feed curiosity. That restraint spoke louder than any statement ever could. Industry insiders, when asked indirectly, offered careful responses. Words like professional, respectful, and comfortable came up again and again. No one hinted at drama. No one suggested tension. If anything, there was an emphasis on balance, on learning how to exist within the spotlight without letting it define every interaction. That's not an easy lesson, especially when the world feels entitled to answers. But Freen and Becky didn't offer answers. They offered consistency. And consistency, after uncertainty, becomes reassurance. People began to understand that separation doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it's a pause meant to protect something fragile before it becomes damaged. Sometimes it's the only way to return with clarity instead of resentment. That's what made the studio moment resonate so deeply. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel corrective. It felt intentional in the quietest way possible. Two people leaving the same place, at the same time, choosing the same direction for a few steps. Nothing more, nothing less. And in those few steps, fans saw something they hadn't realized they were waiting for, not a declaration, not a reunion announcement, but balance. The kind of balance that allows connection to exist without consuming the people inside it. As weeks passed, the image remained unchanged in memory. It wasn't overwritten by new sightings or louder moments. It stayed exactly as it was, simple, unembellished, and real. That's rare, because most viral moments burn quickly. They flare up and fade out, replaced by the next headline. This one lingered, not because it demanded attention, but because it invited reflection. It reminded people that relationships, whether professional, personal, or something in between, are not linear stories meant for constant display. They're lived quietly, shaped by conversations no one hears and decisions no one sees. Freen and Becky didn't need to explain themselves that night. They showed enough. They showed that whatever had shifted during the time apart hadn't erased mutual respect. That whatever they were rebuilding or redefining was being handled with care. That not everything meaningful needs to be shared in real time. Sometimes, the most powerful message is restraint. And sometimes, walking out of a studio side by side is not a signal to speculate, but an invitation to trust. Trust that they know what they're doing. Trust that they're protecting what matters. Trust that if and when there is more to share, it will come naturally. Until then, that moment stands on its own. Two people, one quiet exit, and a world watching, not with impatience anymore, but with understanding. And perhaps that's the real turning point in this story.